The Man Who Knew Lincoln. Jake Harmon slumped in his seat, hood pulled over his head, phone hidden beneath his desk. History class was bad enough on a normal day, but a substitute teacher meant it would be even more pointless, just another adult reading from a textbook while counting down the minutes until the bell. "Mr. Williams is out sick today," Principal Chen announced from the doorway. "This is Mr. Hanks, who'll be covering your American history class." Jake didn't bother looking up until a strange silence fell over the room. When he finally raised his eyes, he found himself staring at perhaps the oddest-looking substitute he'd ever seen. Mr. Hanks was tall and gangly with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He wore an outdated tweed jacket with leather patches at the elbows, and his beard, though neatly trimmed, had an old-fashioned quality to it. "Good morning," Mr. Hanks said. His voice was unexpectedly high-pitched but carried a certain gravitas. "I understand you're studying the Civil War period." Abigail Morgan, the class overachiever, raised her hand. "We just finished the section on Lincoln's election. We're supposed to discuss the early war years today." Mr. Hanks nodded, setting down his ancient leather satchel on the desk. "The early war years, yes." He paused, seeming to look through the classroom walls to somewhere else entirely. "Dark times." Jake rolled his eyes. Great, another history buff who thought the past was somehow more interesting than TikTok. "Before we begin," Mr. Hanks said, "I'd like to know what you think of Abraham Lincoln." Hands shot up around the room. Jake kept his firmly in his pocket. "He freed the slaves," someone called out. "He saved the Union," added another. "He was assassinated at Ford's Theater," Abigail contributed. Mr. Hanks nodded patiently, but his eyes betrayed something like disappointment. "Those are the facts we memorize," he said softly, "but they tell us nothing of the man." He reached into his satchel and withdrew not a textbook but a small, worn leather-bound volume. "This is a collection of personal accounts of Abraham Lincoln. Not the president on the penny, but the human being who walked the earth for 56 years. Jake's attention was momentarily captured by the book. It looked authentically weathered by time, with cracked leather and yellowed pages. "You," Mr. Hanks said suddenly, pointing directly at Jake. "What's your name?" Jake straightened involuntarily. "Jake." "Jake, if I asked you to describe yourself in one sentence, would you mention that you got a D- on last week's math test?" The class tittered. Jake felt heat rise to his face. "How'd you know about that?" Mr. Hanks ignored the question. "Or would you perhaps say that you're a person who stays up late worrying about your mother's health? Or that you've been drawing comic book characters since you were 6? Jake stared, mouth open. He had told no one about his late-night anxiety over his mom's recent diagnosis, and only his closest friends knew about his secret sketch habit. "My point," Mr. Hanks continued, addressing the class again, "is that we are not defined by the facts others record about us. Lincoln was not merely a collection of accomplishments and tragedies. He was flesh and blood, full of contradictions and sorrows." From his satchel, Mr. Hanks produced what appeared to be an old photograph. Jake couldn't see it clearly from his seat, but it looked like a Civil War-era image. Lincoln once said after losing a Senate race, "With me, the race of ambition has been a failure, a flat failure." Does that sound like the great emancipator you've read about? The man who kept a nation together? The classroom was silent now. Even Jake found himself leaning forward slightly. For 19 years, Lincoln endured crushing defeats. He lost his first election. His business failed. The love of his life died. His marriage was often unhappy. He suffered from what we now call depression. They called him the saddest man in all Illinois. The strange teacher spoke these words as if reciting from memory, not reading them, as if he'd heard them firsthand. When Lincoln became president, Mr. Hanks continued, he was considered completely unqualified. A newspaper wrote that he was undoubtedly the most unfortunate politician that has ever attempted to rise in Illinois. Jake felt an unexpected twinge of recognition. Mr. Hanks moved around the classroom, his tall frame casting long shadows in the afternoon light. Once, after preparing for months for an important lecture, he rented a hall, had tickets printed, and not a single person showed up to hear him speak. Not one. A few students laughed nervously, but Jake didn't. He was thinking about the school talent show last year, when he'd worked up the courage to display his artwork, only to overhear classmates mocking it. Lincoln said, "When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad, and that's my religion." Simple words, but there's wisdom there, don't you think? Mr. Hanks removed his jacket, and Jake noticed the substitute's ill-fitting clothes, similar to descriptions he'd heard of Lincoln's own wardrobe. Something about this teacher seemed increasingly strange, the way he spoke of Lincoln with such familiarity, the antiquated phrases he used. During the war, Lincoln was crushed by the weight of his responsibility, Mr. Hanks said, his voice growing softer. He would walk the halls of the White House at night, unable to sleep. He told a friend, "I feel as though I shall never be glad again." The teacher withdrew a pocket watch from his vest and checked it briefly. It looked genuinely antique, with an elaborate engraving on its case. But what made Lincoln extraordinary wasn't his successes, it was his capacity to endure failure after failure without giving up, to face a world that repeatedly told him he wasn't good enough, and still believe he had something to offer. Mr. Hanks reached back into his satchel and pulled out a stack of papers. "I'd like you to read something." As the papers were passed around, Jake received his copy and looked down at what appeared to be a photocopy of handwritten text. At the top was the title, "Notes from Lincoln's Law Partner, William Herndon." "I want each of you to read a paragraph aloud," Mr. Hanks instructed. "Jake, would you start?" Jake wanted to refuse, but something in Mr. Hanks' eyes made him hesitate. Reluctantly, he began to read. "If Lincoln ever had a happy day in 20 years, I never knew of it." Melancholy dripped from him as he walked. Jake paused, feeling the weight of the words. From this time to the end of his life, Lincoln had a fondness, almost an obsession, for poems dealing with sorrow and death. As the reading continued around the class, Jake found himself increasingly absorbed. This wasn't the Lincoln from the textbooks. This was a man who struggled with depression, who suffered political humiliations, who was mocked by the press, who endured a difficult marriage. When the readings finished, Mr. Hanks stood silently for a moment. "History remembers Lincoln's triumphs," he said finally, "but I've always thought his failures were more instructive. Even as president, after the Battle of Gettysburg, when General Meade let the Confederate Army escape across the Potomac, Lincoln wrote a scathing letter in his frustration." Mr. Hanks closed his eyes, and to Jake's astonishment, began to recite what seemed to be the entire letter from memory. "My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within our easy grasp, and to have closed upon him would, in connection with our other late successes, have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely." Mr. Hanks opened his eyes. "But do you know what Lincoln did with that letter?" The class waited. "He never sent it. It was found among his papers after his death. Even in his frustration, he chose compassion over blame." Jake found himself oddly moved. His phone lay forgotten in his pocket. "I've brought something else to show you," Mr. Hanks said, reaching once more into his satchel. He withdrew what appeared to be a framed photograph and laid it on his desk. "Would anyone like to see a rare photograph from Gettysburg?" The class gathered around, Jake hanging back initially but eventually squeezing in to see. It was a sepia-toned image of a crowd at what appeared to be the ceremony where Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. "Lincoln is there, of course," Mr. Hanks said, pointing to a tall, bearded figure. "But I want you to look at these two people in the crowd. This boy here," he indicated a small figure in unusual period clothing. "Some believe he doesn't belong in this photograph, a child from another time who found his way to Gettysburg. And this man," he pointed to a taller figure standing slightly apart from the crowd, his features bearing a subtle resemblance to Mr. Hanks himself. "Some say he appears in multiple historical photographs across different eras, observers, you might call them." The bell rang, startling everyone. Jake realized the entire period had passed without him checking his phone once. "Your assignment," Mr. Hanks called over the sudden commotion of students gathering their things, "is to write one page about a failure in your own life and what you learned from it. Think about Lincoln's resilience in the face of repeated setbacks." As others filed out, Jake lingered, drawn to the strange photograph still sitting on the desk. "You have a question, Jake?" Mr. Hanks asked. "That man in the photo," Jake said. "He looks kind of like you." Mr. Hanks smiled faintly. "Does he? I hadn't noticed." "How do you know so much about Lincoln? It's like you knew him or something." "Some historical figures speak to us across time," Mr. Hanks replied. "Don't you find that certain voices from the past seem to address our present concerns directly?" Jake thought about it. "I guess, but you talk about him like you were there." Mr. Hanks carefully returned the photograph to his satchel. "Perhaps in some ways, I was." He checked his antique pocket watch again. "You should get to your next class, Jake." "Will you be here tomorrow?" Jake asked, surprised by his own disappointment at the thought this might be their only lesson with a strange substitute. "No," Mr. Hanks said. "I'm only passing through, but I hope our paths cross again someday." As Jake turned to leave, Mr. Hanks added, "You know, I loved to draw when I was young. I would sketch on scraps of wood with pieces of charcoal from the fire." Jake stopped. "How did you know I like to draw?" "Some things are written more plainly than others," Mr. Hanks replied cryptically. "Your sketchbook is peeking out of your backpack, and there's graphite on your fingertips." Jake zipped his backpack closed, embarrassed. "Don't hide your talents, Jake," Mr. Hanks said. "Lincoln once said, 'Whatever you are, be a good one.'" With that, the substitute turned away and began packing his satchel. That evening, for the first time in months, Jake didn't turn on his gaming console after dinner. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table while his mother prepared coffee. "How was school?" she asked, the same question she asked every day. "Weird," Jake replied. "We had this substitute in history who was obsessed with Abraham Lincoln." "That sounds interesting," his mom said, though her tone suggested she expected the usual teenage dismissal. "It actually kind of was," Jake admitted. "He talked about Lincoln being depressed and failing at stuff for years before becoming president." His mother looked up, surprised at Jake's engagement. "That's true. Lincoln had a hard life before the presidency." "Yeah, and even during it. Did you know he had to deal with generals who wouldn't fight and politicians who hated him? And his own wife was kind of a nightmare." His mother smiled. "Sounds like you actually paid attention today." Jake shrugged. The sub was different. He knew all these details, like personal stuff about Lincoln. Like he'd actually met him or something. "What was his name?" "Mr. Hanks," Jake said. Then, after a moment, "Hey, wasn't Lincoln's mother's maiden name Hanks? I think the sub mentioned that." His mother nodded. "Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Maybe your substitute is a distant relative." "Maybe," Jake said, but he was thinking about the strange photograph Mr. Hanks had shown them, and the man in the crowd who looked so familiar. Later that night, Jake found himself searching online for information about Lincoln. He read about Lincoln's depression, his political failures, the death of his son Willie during the presidency, his troubled marriage to Mary Todd. He came across a quote that Mr. Hanks hadn't mentioned: "The best thing about the future is that it comes one day at a time." Jake thought about his own anxieties, about school, about his mother's health, about his future. One day at a time. He could manage that. Before bed, he pulled out his sketchbook and began to draw. Not his usual superhero characters, but a tall, gangly man with deep-set eyes and a beard, wearing an ill-fitting suit, his face etched with both sadness and determination. Beneath it, he wrote, "Whatever you are, be a good one." The next morning, Jake arrived early to history class, but Mr. Williams was back, looking pale but recovered. "Where's Mr. Hanks?" Jake asked. Mr. Williams looked confused. "Who?" "The substitute from yesterday. Tall guy, beard, really into Lincoln." "There wasn't any substitute yesterday," Mr. Williams said. "Principal Chen canceled class when I called in sick. Didn't you get the notification?" Jake stared. "But we were all here. The whole class." Mr. Williams shook his head. "Maybe you're thinking of another day." As other students filed in, Jake asked, "Didn't we have a substitute yesterday, Mr. Hanks?" Most shrugged or looked confused, but Abigail Morgan paused. "I was homesick yesterday too, but I had this weird dream about a history class in Lincoln." Jake felt a chill run through him. He pulled out his phone and searched Gettysburg time travel photo. The image that appeared was similar to what Mr. Hanks had shown them: a crowd at Gettysburg, with a figure that seemed out of place. After class, Jake approached Principal Chen's office. "Excuse me," he said to the secretary. "Can you tell me who substituted for Mr. Williams yesterday?" She checked her computer. There wasn't a substitute scheduled. The class was canceled. "But I was there," Jake insisted. "We all were. The teacher's name was Hanks." The secretary looked bewildered. "There's no Mr. Hanks in our substitute pool." That afternoon, Jake stopped by the school library and, for the first time, checked out a biography of Abraham Lincoln. As he flipped through it, a small piece of paper fell out from between the pages, a note written in an elegant, old-fashioned hand. "The past is never truly gone, Jake. It speaks to those who listen. History is not about memorizing facts, but about understanding the human experience across time. Draw what you see. Tell the stories that matter. T.H. Jake stared at the note, then carefully tucked it into his sketchbook. On the blank page beside it, he began to draw a tall figure standing beside a seated Lincoln, both men looking out from the page as if across time itself, bearing witness to a world they had helped to shape but would never fully see. And for the first time in years, Jake felt the weight of history not as a burden of facts to memorize, but as a conversation across centuries, one that he, too, could join.